What is up, you guys? Welcome to another After Work Yappings solo edition. Trying to set this everything up behind the scenes. It's a lot of camera work. Today we have to solo man carry because most of our crew, staff members, our assistants are reporting off duty. But this is a special stream. We're going off standard programming and we're gonna discuss the cultural phenomenon that is Stranger Things. I know, I am late to the party. I'll be looking down to my notes because I do want to do this episode as solid and don't miss out too much of the details. Obviously, this TV show has taken the industry by storm. It's been so successful that even on the launch date, I think it was 26th of November, supposed to air at a certain point, and in preparation, Netflix already secured even more servers and more bandwidth, so it can contain all the viewers that will stream at the same time, yet it went down. Obviously, from the moment it would be streamed. So that just goes to say, because what I noticed, and we talked on this with our colleagues, that even though it's 10 years later and we have bigger bandwidth more than ever, so the servers can contain way more viewers at the same time, and yet the servers went down even though they had the preparations, then it just goes to say how much fans they were creating and have built throughout the years. Obviously, this series has been spread over 10 years. I think it was initially aired at 2016, if I'm correct. And yeah, obviously because of COVID and the strikes and so forth, things was much more pushed out throughout the timeline. So one of the memes the people on the internet were saying, obviously, were that the actors are actually not child actors anymore, although they are supposed to play 16 and 17-year-olds, which they are not. But you know, I think the costumes and makeup department did a good job. Could have fooled me. I have obviously, within 1 week, last week, watched the whole season because I haven't seen any of it. From what I've noticed and the information gathering I have done over the past 2 weeks, actually, it's especially people that are from 2000, born in 2005 or between 2000 and 2005-ish, which they in turn now are 20, around 20, 22-ish. They are the biggest fan of it, which makes sense because that would mean, if we rewind back in 10 years, that they were like around the age of 10, 11, 12, basically the same age as the child actors that were obviously in these TV shows and these episodes. And obviously throughout the years, the child actors have become adult actors. And as they have grown, you know, the watchers, the viewers have grown too. And that is one part that makes it successful. Obviously we did dive into why this makes it a successful hit show in another stream. But regarding this specific stream, we're gonna dive in the whole lore, backstory, prologue, season 1, 2, 3, 4. So basically everything you need to know, plus theories, plus spoilers episode. And we're just gonna dive in, obviously. And this is not a live stream for the first time because there's too much things to keep attention to, so I cannot manage the comments at the same time, whereas also the live streams to stay online. So this is like a pre-recorded show for the first time with no live stream. But so for those who are watching, we're gonna dive in. There will be spoilers, so beware. There will be fan fiction theories from Reddit or the YouTubers, because I've done some digging and some research. Obviously, I have my own takes of certain things, and we try to glue all these things together as much as possible with the most, in my opinion, the most logic and the correct order of things, so you have everything you need. So you have the starter pack, start season 5, obviously, and I assume a lot of you actually watched already the first episodes of season 5, which is gonna come in 3 installments. Obviously, the first part was released on Thanksgiving, second part will come during Christmas, and the last part, which is the last episode, will come in I think on New Year's Eve. For those who are stuck at home and not outside playing with fireworks or serving turkey, you have something to do, which will be me probably, because I'll be working, and we'll be watching that after work, maybe, who knows. So we're gonna dive in. Spoilers ahead, you have been warned. I won't, however, for concrete discretion purposes, I will state whenever it is based on my own theories, which I have basically developed and with some research and collecting some data. Especially already, I think in the beginning we'll have some theories of mine, which will come back obviously later in the season 5. As the Duffer brothers have mentioned in multiple interviews, they will make, well, everything will be clear at the end of season 5. So they say. I am very anxious that they're gonna do some kind of a time jump kind of thing, and we will dive into these kind of theories in another stream, but I sure don't hope so. I sure hope there is just a certain ending. Obviously, if they have to kill off some certain characters, they have managed to survive multiple seasons, many of them. I will dive into them soon. Oh, also this stream will not dive into the character arcs and character development. I do think these deserve a different set of stream, and we'll dive in. For those who don't know, there is actually a Broadway play installation that came in between, I think it was season 4 and 5, which is still playing, so you can actively go there if you have the means and the time to go out there and watch it in real life. I think it's playing in London and in UK and the US. Let's ask ChatGPT actually.
So Stranger Things, The First Shadow, actually premiered in London's West End. It started previews in November 2023 and officially opened in December 2023 at the Phoenix Theater. It's running there through 2026. And then it also debuted on Broadway in New York. The Broadway preview started in March 2025 and it officially opened in April 2025 at the Marquee Theater. So if anyone wants to catch it, those are the cities and timelines where they can see it.
So yeah, as you can hear, the Duffer brothers have stated that The First Shadow is canon. A lot of YouTubers have dived into this, but I try to actually fact check from what's actually in the play and what people are telling you online. Obviously, I am also one of the voices, and take it with a grain of salt. There are certain theories that really don't line up, and I try to gather the most logical explanation to certain moments in the play. Why we are starting with this prologue, I will call it a prologue, because everything started with this play, or whatever proceeded to happen within this play. So it's very important for any viewers to at least know, the essence of what the play is about. Get a little bit of background information on these characters and basically the parents of the main characters, kinda, because they do play a part in this play of The First Shadow. And we'll talk on Henry Creel and Vecna and the Brennan. The dad does play a little part, and so that's why we start with the play, because I do think it's very essential, and everyone does start with the play. So in chronological order, we'll go from here, and then obviously we're gonna end at the end of season 4, and then basically conclude this episode. Why we want to dive in the First Shadow? For obviously you get to know about Henry's true origin stories, the motives of Dr. Brenner, why he's so dead set on uncovering the depths of the power of 11 and all the test subjects, all the numbers within the rainbow rooms. You do see Joyce, Hopper, and Bob as teens. Henry did have a love interest, Hawkins law, and how that's gonna bridge in. So, first of all, the story starts in 1943 between the First and the Second World War. The US was trying to experiment on techniques or methods to basically make battleship invisible. This battleship and these theories were actually a parallel to the real world Philadelphia experiment, and so basically it is, and that's a theme that actually occurred throughout seasons. I've noticed that they do wink at past occurrences like the JFK, like the assassination, if they were framed. They say the one that shot JFK, if he was framed or not. Certain other places that they were referring cultural items or cultural hot topics, and they basically give a nice take or their opinion on the matter. So this is actually something that, and you'll see it throughout the seasons. There are certain things that might or might not have happened in the past, but they were definitely conspiracy theories that were at play at that time, or actually still at play nowadays regarding that time. So 1943, the US wanted the US Army, I would assume, during the World War II, obviously against the Germans, they were trying to make one of their battleships invisible through whatever experiment they were doing, but they were working with magnetic fields, and somehow the experiment was a success because the ship did disappear with the crew and the captain of that battleship is obviously no other than the father of Dr. Brennan, Martin Brennan, and they disappeared to this Dimension X, so we discover. For those who watch throughout the series, Dimension X is basically that dimension when Henry first came. Well, actually the second time, and we'll talk about this in a moment, when 11 cast him away from the Rainbow Room, you know, like the end of season 4, and we'll get to that. So she cast him away basically from the real world to the Dimension X, kind of, you know, like a push, metaphysical push from the reality they are in to Dimension X. Actually, he goes through the hellscape first, and that's another topic we'll dive into in a moment, but that is actually, in theory, his second visit in Dimension X. It's that world where the stones are floating around, you see the Demogorgons on the back end, and the landscape's kind of yellowish. It has a black-yellow tone, and that's where he first encountered the Mind Flare, as they call it. So this is Dimension X. This is where the ships landed somehow through this experiment. Every member of the crew got killed, basically. Ship came back, only survivor, the father, no other of Dr. Brennan, and he was changed ever since then. And this is, again, these are show notes from the Broadway play. His blood type was changed, and also his character and personality was kind of changed ever since then. He didn't manage to live on. However, there were differences, I've been told, I've seen, between the UK and the US versions on how long he got to live. Whereas in the US version, they actually put him in to encounter with Henry Creel, and that's actually what took Henry Creel power to the next level. But that's just the differences, but I mean how it really activates, we'll dive in a little bit. But ships come back, whole crew wiped out, captains left, changed forever. Now here is already my first personal take. I've yet to hear this take from anyone else, but this will spin throughout the seasons, and then I think will come to play in season 5. Because remember, there are certain moments in each season or several seasons that it has to do with magnetic fields. In season 1, they were using this compass, and it was just turning, unless it was turning north, and basically where the field was aligned, so it's not turning away, but then if you hit it north, so basically where the first steer was in the Hawkins lab, the compass was not acting up. In season 3, you've seen the magnets fall off, because if there is a huge enough magnetic fields, as the professor or the teacher of Will and those kids explained, was immense enough, it will just basically give off this, will be the anti-magnetic field. So basically anything that will stick to iron or metal, it just falls off. I'm actually curious why what this theory is, so we can dive into that with my help of ChatGPT, obviously.
That's a fun detail from season 3. So in season 3, Joyce notices that the magnets when her fridge and around town are falling off and not sticking anymore. This leads her down this whole investigative path where she teams up with Hopper. The theory behind it is basically that the Russians are using a machine under Starcourt Mall that's generating a huge electromagnetic field. That field is messing with the local magnetism, which is why the magnets are sticking. It's a clue that there's some kind of large-scale electromagnetic activity going on, which ties into the Russians trying to open another match stay upside down. So it's all connected to that larger plot of season 3.
Here they say it's about the Russians, but let's rewind back to actually season 2. They had some particles collected from those pumpkin fields. Remember the whole pumpkin fields? The farmers were blaming each other, like, hey, they were blaming each other. The guy doesn't want to see me make money, or he's just like trying to destroy my fields and my yield of the field. And that's why he's doing it, but obviously it was the Mind Flare's vines that went underground, remember? The OSS tunnels that were making those pumpkins rot. They got some particles from that field, and I think it was also maybe from other things that were laying around. And they had this them collected in this glass, and they were spinning, and they had like one glass and then different glass, all with the same particle, and then with some magnetic jolt, they made it spin around, and you see that every single glass that contains the particles basically all went in the same direction. Well, 2 revelations here, obviously. They discovered that they call it the hive mind, right? The mind flare. It's all connected. But from what I've seen, it's also kind of connected in a magnetic way. Because that's just basically my theory. I think if you're infected, as you call it, or affected by the Mind Flare particles, those black things that went into Will, you know, season 2. Those particles will go, so basically these are magnetic particles. They will go into your blood cells or brain neural cells, and then from there, because it's all connected to the central place, they get to somehow manipulate your behavior and how you move, and that's how it's connected to the total mind flare that still actually lives in Dimension X. Well, that's in theory, and that's how the mind flare is controlling every single one of them. Like if it's like moving like to the left, all the Demogorgons going there, or he's targeting this person or this person, he kind of can put a signal, right? If it was magnetic, it's for them easy to pinpoint which one it is, just to change the frequency a little bit, right? That's how I see it. They do, in my opinion, observation, look like magnetic particles. So this is my theory. We are already in tinfoil head conspiracy theory land. So this is what the mind flare does. When you get there, they invade you, as they have invaded the Demogorgons in Dimension X. It's basically one huge being or creature or sentient being that's basically just want to have full control and have dominion over a certain planet or environment. It is acting like a virus, basically. So basically it falls in line with how a virus would act. And I'm actually curious if ChatGPT was agreeing.
That's a really key theory, and it definitely makes sense to think of the mind flare in terms of something like magnetic or particulate control. The show definitely plays with that idea of the mind flare being this sort of sentient, almost particle-like entity that can infiltrate and control hosts. As for why it always wants to expand and take over hosts, the mind flare seems to operate a bit like a hive mind that's always seeking to grow its influence. It's kind of like a viral intelligence that wants to spread and dominate. It doesn't just want to exist on its own. It wants to use hosts to extend its reach into the physical world. So in a way, it's always looking to expand its territory and gain more control. And that fits right in with what we see in the show. It's not just about taking over one person. It's about creating an entire network of controlled beings to ultimately merge dimensions and take over Hawkins and beyond.
So in that sense, this is just within the biology of a virus. It just wants to expand and take over until it's no more to expand. But as there are more locations or environments to take over or host bodies, it will do so. So this is what I think. As Demogorgons obviously destroyed the whole crew of the ship, so we're going back to the ship in 1943, that was transformed from the actual world to the Dimension X, there was one person left. But this is also intended for the mind flare, because they need to have food for the Demogorgon, because that's just fresh meat, that's what I assume. But they need also someone to carry over, because here there is this opportunity, some person or someone that came from one certain dimension that didn't exist yet, because it is a creature they don't recognize. And it came there, so it must be coming back at some point. So I think at that point, the mind flare, and that's the first time he did it to a human, did the same thing to the death of Brennan as they did to Will in season 2. So basically, he pushes a certain part of itself within the being and essence of Martin Brennan's dad, which is the captain of the ship. This explains why the whole character has changed and the blood type has changed. It could not otherwise be, no other explanation would be logical if they were no particles that go into the blood cells, actually. And that's why my theory of magnetic particles that go into blood cells would make sense, and that's how they remain controlled. And basically, they already infected one person with this virus or particle. This person carries over the mind flare, and this is the first exposure of the mind flare to human world, if you will. Obviously, the dead doesn't remain alive for long enough for the mind flare to exude any more dominion or power over its body. Maybe it needs a certain fertile ground, if you will, for lack of a better term, to basically have better control, bigger control over it. And now we're gonna come to Henry Creel. So the first object was basically it was a success because it got a glimpse of the human world. It got a flavor for it. But it didn't last because the mind flare couldn't have enough power over it, and eventually the host dies off, and then therefore they lose contact of the human world. So I think ever since then, it was just waiting for a better opportunity. So the dad came back, so the captain of the ship, changed forever, had a few conversations with the son, Brenner, so Dr. Papa, as Eleven calls him, gets basically the full story of the dad. And that's how he got really fascinated on whatever this dimension is. Where did I go? How do we go back? What is there to find? And how can we achieve this again? And somehow he got involved in this project in Nevada, right? Which is basically to explore more of this Dimension X. This is when basically theories are just gonna be a little bit, well, you have two sides of this theory. One side of the theory says there is this Russian spy lab worker who stole a device that contains the particles of Dimension X and went to hide away in a cave in which he will later meet Henry Creel. Another side of the story said there was never this device which contains the particles, and there were just leftover residue tears from the original experiment from 1943. As you have seen throughout the seasons, they were actually certain little minor tears that were kind of open throughout the environment. Obviously in 1943 it was in Nevada. Well, it was in Pennsylvania, but I think in this case the experiment is in Nevada. So that will make sense. There was some leftover tears between dimensions that people can still walk through, kinda. So this is where the theories already are splitting. Me personally leaning towards that there were leftover tears between dimensions, that basically in that sense Henry Creel walked in. But the other one would make sense, but ChatGPT doesn't support this theory. So, but all the other YouTubers do. So, you know, whatever, left or right, he got in contact. So this is how. We rewind we forward to 1958. Here, Henry is 12 years old. They live in Nevada, far away from Hawkins. And Henry is already kind of an odd kid, emotionally disconnected, but nothing violent yet, you know, just like a absent kid. You can compare it. There's a lot of parallels if you look at this, especially that's why this epilogue is so important. There is a lot of parallels between Henry and Will, way more than you think. Basically, Henry is basically Will from 30 years ago. So it's a 12 years old kid, loves cave exploration, hence the spyglass, and this item will come back to haunt him. Family goes on this canyon exploration, and somehow Henry wanders off. Well, this is where also there are different sides of the story. Basically, he ends up exploring the caves and then ends up in this particular cave. Well, the one side of theories, people say this is where the Russian spy lab worker was hiding, and the other side is saying this is where the tear was left. According to ChatGPT, there is no Russian spy, there is no device with the particles, so we're leaning from now on to the side of there is a little tear still open in that cave, and Henry was exploring the cave and somehow stumbled upon this tear and went in. Maybe something was calling to him, or he was just super curious, and this is how he disappeared for 12 hours. Yes, also Henry disappeared from the real world to dimension. Well, Will disappeared to the upside down, but that's another thing. We'll talk about this in a moment when we discuss season 1. But Henry too disappears from the real world, but now for 12 hours. When he came back, again, his blood type is changed, personality is changed, a whole different kid. So if you lean to my theory, what I just said, what the mind flare does. Here comes the second test object from the human world in his domain. But this test object is younger, way more malleable, more fertile, if you will, so more a youthful body, so a more malleable body to, you know, manipulate and build up and mold to however it wanted to be and control, and easier to control as well. Basically, you have still your developmental years. If you're already affected by this virus, you develop with the virus. So in this sense, the survivability of the host with the virus is way higher. And I think this is an important mark, and this is my theory. This is when the mind flare first discovered the taste of a kid with, first of all, who's emotionally kind of hiding, and they are like kind of connected to the rest of the world. They're kind of odd type in the group, usually introverts, stick to themselves, likes games, or kind of, you know, quote unquote the nerd types, or kind of incel types if they call it in the internet cultures. Well, for kids it doesn't make sense, but you know, like those who wanna, the shut-ins that don't wanna go outside and don't know how to make friends, and basically those who usually get teased from what we can see from other seasons. So they are easily malleable because, you know, like that's kind of the two sides of the story, a theme throughout the seasons. It's about love or hate, and hate usually comes from the feet ground of loneliness, because if you're lonely, you think everybody's around you, eventually you start to hate everybody. Well, at least there is an inkling of this thought, and so therefore the mind flare is easily to tap in this fear side and anger, you know, to get good dominion over the host. Whereas the love side, which is more like brighter, lighter energy, if you will, it's kind of the counter, you know, productive to the mind flare. It's the counterproductive to the fear and the loneliness. In the UK, you've seen this symbolism throughout the seasons. Why is fire the only weapon that actually works against these demogorgons and Vecna and the mind flare? Well, fire is kind of, in the biblical sense, the purification of anything that's bad, right? That's the reason why you end up in heaven, you have to go through this gate, and then they just like test you with the swords of fire, white flame as they call it. And that's basically in symbolism worlds. Well, let Chet explain why there's a purification factor.
So if you think about it, in a lot of stories, especially ones that have those deeper mythological or biblical layers, fire and love are often symbols of purification and redemption. Fire in a biblical sense can represent something that burns away darkness, kind of like a refining force. And love is often seen as this ultimate light or warmth that can drive out fear and isolation. So if we apply that to Stranger Things, it makes a lot of sense that Vecna and the Mind Flayer feed on those darker emotions like loneliness, fear, and anger, because those emotions isolate people and make them easier to control. And then on the flip side, the symbols of fire and love, things like friendship, warmth, and human connection, are what the characters use to fight back. Those emotions are like the light that pushes out the darkness and breaks the hold that these creatures have. So it's a really nice symbolic layer that ties into those deeper themes of overcoming fear with love and connection.
Oh, there you have it. I actually didn't look this up before, but it was a theory in my mind, and it just makes a lot of sense how 11 in season 4 had to tap in love, you know, to expand her powers, whereas in season 2 she was trying to tap in anger, but that was not by far as powerful as love. And this kind of makes sense now why Vecna is just looking for victims that are isolated and alone and fearsome, because this, as you can hear from ChatGPT, it's a good feeding ground for him to exert his power and dominion over the subject. So, back to Henry Creel. Henry Creel goes to Dimension X somehow with his spyglass, falling down, going in cave exploration, went to this tier. That's the theory we're going with. Ends up in this somehow Dimension X, basically probably traumatizing, not probably, but for sure traumatizing event, and this will come back in season 5, why he won't enter the cave, but we'll talk about this later and refer back to. And I can imagine if you're 12 and you end up in this random dimension, which is spooky and it's just very post-apocalyptic, there is no human civilization, there is no humans, everything is just yellowish and black, and you have random monsters running around, I think you will be super traumatized as a kid, and that's a memory you for sure want to block out in your mind. Somehow I kind of wonder why he was never attacked by the Demogorgons, because it is fresh meat in this dimension, and as you have heard from the example in 1943, the whole crew of the ship was basically slaughtered except the captain. So that makes sense that we'll get to live and the Demogorgon did not attack, because I think somehow the Mind Flayer sensed, well, let's just call him the Big Bad or something like that. We'll just come up with a name later. For now, just the MF. MF basically identified there is a soul victim. He already got a glimpse of what it is like to live or see the dimension of a world that he hasn't conquered yet, right? A world that he hasn't infected yet. But the last set subject was obviously older, couldn't survive with his influence, and basically died off. And here comes this fresh, which is way more fertile object for him to take over. And so this is the second time he exerted his influence and basically spread his virus. Those electrical magnetic particles, also how they went into Will, went into Henry Creel. These names rhyme. But so this is the second time he took over a subject and had that host, basically that becomes the host body, carry him into the real world. Well, this time around, it was way more successful than the last time. Now we're gonna fast forward. Henry was so traumatized he couldn't be act normal again, but then again, because of the MF's influence, he couldn't act normal anyways, because kind of a different personality in his mind, in the subconscious, took over his cerebral brain. The family decided to move. That's where Hawkins come in. The guy is 12, so as basically this note is saying, there is no device, no machine, no Soviet tech. Henry encounters natural micro tear connected to Dimension X. This tear may be a lingering ripple from the 1943 ship event, which we have said. Henry experiences the shadow for the first time. That's why the play is called The First Shadow. He is marked, not controlled. Psychic potential awakens internally, returned, silent, changed, withdrawn, which he already was. This is the birth of Vecna, but still dormant. No animal killing yet, no violence, no sadism, only early spiritual infection. Then we move a year forward. In 1959, the Creels move to Hawkins. Now this is where the party starts. This is the house that you see in season 4, the Creel house. The family believes there, with the new environment, may help their sweet dear little boy recover from whatever he's suffering from, because obviously they don't know it's been infected by this other dimensional creature or entity, and they just basically move to Hawkins. Hawkins, right? New start, fresh start, small town. At this point, this is also where Henry Creel had to go to high school, and that's where they meet Joyce, Hopper, Bob, and Patty. Joyce, Hopper, Bob are the characters we also see in season 1, 2, and yeah, both in 1 and 2 already. You meet them, we all know who they are. At that point, in this play, Joyce was the one that's actually really a passionate drama student. So she's directing this play and looking for people that want to participate and play within this play, right? Theater. Hopper is this kid that has a bad relationship with their dad, and basically the dad is just saying he's no good and is worth nothing. Someone that really tried to prove himself. Bob is this radio jockey, kind of reminiscent of Robin, always digging up information, sharing juice throughout the high school, and he runs this radio station. Then we have Patty, which becomes later the love interest of Henry, which allegedly is an adopted daughter of the school principal. But again, here we have two theories. Theory 1, because he was divorced before, he adopted a kid to maybe make it work with his wife, and that's kind of how eventually they still divorced, that the relationship never really got restored, and he was never really good to the adopted daughter, which is Patty. Patty also is kind of a female version of Henry Creel, hence why they are attracted to each other, kind of emotionally disconnected kid, kind of weird, like outlier games, and I'm actually curious. But basically also a shutout.
Patty Newby is a really interesting character from the first Shadow, and you're right that she's not one of the popular kids at Hawkins High in 1959. The reason she's not really popular is that she's a bit of an outsider. She's more introverted, she's kind of buckish, and she's not really part of the main social circles. She's the kind of character who's more in the fringes, and she ends up connecting with Henry Creel because they're both a bit on the outside looking in. As for the theory behind Patty being adopted, that's a detail that gives her a unique backstory. It kind of adds to the idea that she's always felt a little different, or like she doesn't quite fit in. Being adopted might make her feel a bit more like she's searching for where she belongs, and that could be part of why she's drawn to someone like Henry, who's also dealing with feeling like an outsider. So it all kind of ties together to make her a more complex and empathetic character in the story.
So there you have it. She's definitely not one of the cooler ones. But somehow, some way, she ended up to play the lead role in this play of Joyce. And somehow, some way, Henry Creel was convinced by connecting with Patty that he would be her counterpart in this play. And I will not try to bother you guys with whatever the play was about. But there are certain things that are kind of important, and this is where the play, it has to do with everything, but this is where basically the early signs of Vecna arises. And I have to say this right. So again, to rewind, in this part, so Henry Creel joins a new town in a new high school, meets characters like Joyce Byers, who's idealistic, realistic, passionate about theater, sensitive to emotional undercurrents, already cautious, anxious, and nurturing. Her intuition makes her suspicious of Henry already early on. Jim Hopper, yes, the cop, a former athlete, working class, frustrated, protective, loyal to friends, but already carrying anger. His arc towards becoming a cop begins here. Bob Newby, which is the boyfriend, which we meet in season 2 and also dies off in season 2, is the nerdy kid, kind-hearted, brilliant, loved electronic and science, the comedic relief and moral compass, kind of a Dustin / Robin kind of character, I think. Huge emotional anchor in the play. How Henry and Patty's relationship come to be. Henry is drawn to her because Patty, in that case, she sees him as human. She believes the best part out of him, and this part kind of come back to bite her in the ass, and she becomes the symbol of the life that Henry could have had, and her fear eventually, because he has some breakouts, breaks Henry later emotionally. Okay, now we're diving in the occurrence of the animal slaughters.
So in the first Shadow, after Henry Creel moves to Hawkins and starts high school, that's when we see him begin to experiment with animal killings. It starts small, like with rodents or birds, and it's this kind of dark curiosity where he's testing his powers and his control over life and death. It's part of his growing detachment from empathy and his connection to the darker forces influencing him. Meanwhile, Patty Newby is involved in the school play, and she's one of the key people who actually tries to reach out to Henry and befriend him. She's got this gentle and empathetic nature, and she sees that he's troubled, but he doesn't fully understand what's happening beneath the surface. Patty's stepdad is a strict and somewhat authoritarian figure, and there's tension at home, which adds to Patty's sense of feeling like an outsider. As the play's performance approaches, Henry's behavior becomes more erratic. He starts using his powers in more dangerous ways, and the tension builds toward the end of the play. On the final playday, everything comes to a head. Henry's emotional turmoil and his powers reach a breaking point, and that's when we get the big explosion of supernatural events that kind of mirror what we know about the Creel murders from the show's lore. It's this climactic moment where everything that's been building up, the animal killings, Henry's relationship with Patty, and his growing darkness comes crashing down. So that's the arc that leads up to that final explosive scene.
So you can see that even ChatGPT doesn't remember everything. Luckily, I did pay attention to other researchers. And basically, obviously, as you can see from 11, they are able, well, anyone that's affected by the MF, they have the ability to go into the void, like, you know, when they close their eyes and everything's dark around them, because there's another dimension we talk about. Okay, it's a good moment to split a few things up. In Stranger Things, there are certain 5 dimensions to work with. We have the right side up, which is, they call it the real world. That's where our main characters live. You have the upside down, which is an imprint of November 6th, I believe, in 1983. The moment when 11 first made contact in the void world of the Demogorgon. That's when the upside down was created, so a snapshot. Then we have the void, which is the dark environment where people with those psychic powers are able to look up other entities, because they were able to spot Demogorgons, and eventually the Mind Flayer in the beginning and all their friends. And Dimension X, which we already illustrated by the yellow dystopian worlds, floating rocks, clouds, rocks, Demogorgons. It's the birthplace of MF and Demogorgons. Then we have the Hellscape. In theory, that's the place where you see Henry Creel as a grown-up when 11 pushed him through all the dimensions, went from the right side up to the Dimension X, and one could say that the MF is able to create certain gates or tiers within dimensions, which it has influence over, well, it's however small it may be, to open gates within the Hellscape, because that's the part where you see top clouds and the below clouds, and Henry was just floating through, and it was hit by all this lightning. This is basically an endless spot, I assume, because it doesn't seem to have an end, and I think one could not survive long if they stick into this location, so it will behoove them to be dragged into Dimension X or somewhere else, but if they stayed in this hellscape, they will, so we don't want that. Then the last part is this red environment. Well, it says there are 7. Damn, there are so many to keep track. None of the YouTubers talked about this, but they are, in my opinion, and the most logical sense, different worlds. Number 6 is this red environment where you see different parts of the Creel house, and that's where you see Max running around and trying to escape from this dominion. And that's basically this red part is where, or in the initial phase, Vecna has all those kids in, well, spoiler alert, but the whole stream is a spoiler. This is where Vecna keep the kids as well. So this is like red environment, and I think this is just a generated location within the Upside Down or somewhere next to it. I don't know, because he did build a new world, which looks totally different than the Upside Down, because the theme is blue and the other one's red. And then we have this memory world, which Holly is being captured, and where we meet Maxine for the first time. So that's number 7. I call it Henry Memory World, HMW. So yeah, because these are superheroes or supervillains, Henry Creel in this case, is able to use the void to look up anyone and everyone in the world, he opts to eventually help Patty. Because Patty is obviously adopted, she is looking for her biological mom. Turns out the mom is a Broadway player, actress, or a singer, I forgot, just a performer, and he opts in to help search for her. Within their communication moments and in between time, somehow, some way, MF has been exerting power over his subject, which is Henry. This is where he gets fascinated by the Black Widows. This is where he starts to experiment on animals, and in the beginning was kind of a test experiment, but then somehow he kills them because maybe he loses control or didn't have control over anything. But as he killed some living being, he gains energy because he takes everything from them, as he also has mentioned in season 4. So this is how the more animal he killed, because later on he'll start killing humans, the more power MF has over Henry. And then eventually it spirals out of control. But all these pets being killed, obviously raises a huge red flags for the kids in this high school, because it turns out the pattern is that these pets are all from the kids from the drama club. And every time there was a killing, Bob noticed there was some static. Sounds familiar? Not really, because this is kind of how they used magnetic fields in season 1 to find the tier for the compass. I think they used, season 5 they use radio signals to connect with each other from one world to another. Obviously season 2 and season 1 they use the radio frequency to eventually contact with 11, and how 11 contact with them. Same team, different time zone. Bob gets kind of, and we are now fast forwarding the story because this prologue is taking long, but that's fine, no worries, we'll wrap it up real soon. So Bob noticed there are some electro currents through his frequencies when he's on radio, and at some point it was coincided with the time the cat was approximately killed. He did kill a cat somewhere in a store or somewhere that they met up when they had the first kiss. Minor detail, but this is when he first noticed, and basically him, Bob, Joyce, and Hopper started on a search. Eventually they came, principal of the school, which is the stepfather of Patty, discovered that she was dealing with Henry, which he was not so happy about. So he went to the Creel house to confront them. At this point, Henry Creel and Patty were trying to look for the biological mom of Patty, and also concurrently Joyce, Hopper, and Bob was also trying to look for the source of this current disturbance. Dad comes in the building, Henry is in the void world, but then get disturbed. MF takes control, scares both Patty, and then eventually the dad comes to the attic. I'm not sure which room they were, but anyways, the dad walks in. And this is where the first moment of seriously losing control Henry did. Because he both lifted Patty and the dad up high and somehow captures them with vines, came out of nowhere. And there was also vines coming out of his bag. He proceeded to break basically almost every limb of the stepfather and pushed him down throughout the ceiling. And they have a whole conversation where Patty is super scared and basically runs away. The dad is super afraid, that the stepdad is super afraid and said he just had an accident. While this all is happening, Brenner also gets on the trail of Henry Creel, because first of all, it was in the cave where he also found, because there was some disturbance on their radar, that's where he found the spyglass of Henry Creel. And through that, he followed them to Hawkins. From there, he noticed some, obviously, newspaper articles about pet killings in a pattern within a high school. This is how he gets on the radar of Henry Creel. At the last moments, they will meet each other in the back of the theater where there's the final play, right? And here, and this is like really gets a little bit smudgy, the timelines, because people are telling different things. Let's ask ChatGPT, because I don't remember very much the main reason why Brenner was showing up.
So the reason Dr. Brenner shows up at the play is that he's been keeping tabs on Henry for a while. He's interested in any unusual psychic phenomena or anything that hints at supernatural abilities, and Henry's definitely on his radar. By the time of the play, Brenner suspects that Henry might have some kind of latent abilities, and he wants to see for himself. As for why Henry goes to confront Patty, it's a really intense emotional moment. Henry's feeling more isolated and unstable, and he's hurt that Patty, who is one of the few people who showed him kindness, has pulled away out of fear. Earlier, he did lash out and hurt her stepdad using his powers, and that caused Patty to become afraid of him. Henry's feeling rejected and angry, and he wants to confront her about it, almost as if he's desperate for her understanding for validation. So you have this really dramatic scene, Henry's on the edge, Patty's frightened and backing away, and Brenner's in the background observing everything, seeing the proof of Henry's abilities. It's this pivotal moment where all those tensions collide right before everything goes off the rails.
So, as you can see, everything came together. Eventually, somehow, and that's basically we arrive at the end of this, the massacre of, and let's get advice from our help, dear ChatGPT.
So after that intense confrontation at the play, things really spiral out of control for Henry. He's feeling betrayed, isolated, and more unstable than ever, and that's when he returns home to the Creel house. At this point, his powers are fully awakened and fueled by all those dark emotions. In the house, Henry's mother, Virginia, starts to suspect that something is deeply wrong with him. She's frightened by the strange occurrences and his erratic behavior. Henry realizes that his mother might turn him in or try to get him help, and in his twisted state, he sees that as a betrayal. That fear and anger push him over the edge. So in a tragic and horrifying moment, Hager uses his telekinetic powers to kill his mother and sister, making it look like a gruesome supernatural incident. His father, Victor Creel, survives, but is left utterly broken and blamed for the murders. This is the infamous Creel House Massacre that becomes part of Hawkins' dark history. And that's the turning point where Henry falls completely under Brenner's control. Brenner takes him in as the first test subject, and that leads directly to the experiments that create the other children like 11. So that's how it all comes full circle, from that final confrontation to the Creel House tragedy and the beginning of Brenner's experiments.
So, rewind. Henry goes to confront Patty, and somehow everything spirals out of control, and he eventually, and that's also on a play, get pushed by Dr. Brenner, and that is how somehow he again triggered the MF powers and somehow made her fall. Through that, he basically then obviously runs home, and he stays there for a while. And from that moment on, his mom, Victoria, had suspicions. And from there, you will see flashbacks. This is where the scene of the flashback we have all seen. So beside the Broadway, that in season 4, what Maxime, and not only Maxime, but also Nancy get to see. So that's where he basically massacred the whole family except the dad. And because he was using all these powers, he basically passed out with a bleeding nose. This is where Dr. Brenner comes in and takes him under his control and makes him number 1. Now, I had a big question to close this prequel. Why would Henry Creel opt in to stay there? Because obviously he has the power to break free whenever he wants or kill them if they were not nice to them. Because you've seen that eventually they were not really treating him well. He was just another lab rat, and they were just testing on them and controlling them in all gruesome ways. But in reality, because he was young, I think, and he lost basically everyone he knew, he has no support system, and he is still human in some way and a kid, so he did need some guidance and authority figures. So I think that's why he opted to stay. Another thing is that I assume Brenner sold him some pipe dream that he could be the beginning of something magnificent and beautiful, and he will impact many lives after him and just create a new world and help a lot of other kids like him. I think that's kind of the story, a pipe dream they would sell him. And obviously they were using his blood to use out of the blood of pregnant women who were the MK Ultra pregnancy programs, which in the end becomes the mothers of, well, they were injecting that in the mother of 11, 8, and 2, and all the test subject that came after Henry. So I think that's also, but also because they were our lab, and the doctor obviously knew somewhat about his powers and the early exposure of the death of Martin, of Brenner, Dr. Brenner, that he maybe has something to teach Henry. Maybe he has some guidance for Henry. Maybe he could be the sensei, the mentor, the Yoda, for Henry to even better understand and control his powers, so he thinks. And so this wraps up the prequel, because now we're gonna fast forward where the story starts. Fast forward to 1983. This is where the whole story starts. Thanks for watching, guys. Until the next episode, subscribe please, comment, like this video, get our merch. If there's anything you disagree or agree with, please comment in the section. Hope that you tune in the next time, and see you then.